I felt so stifled and controlled, and like I can never be myself or like figure out who
Yeah.
I am, and so it was hard. It was really hard to live like that. I was depressed like all the time, and like you said, like guilting
Yeah.
myself for it, and I wasn't able to get help. So it's like it just got
Yeah.
worse and worse and worse. Welcome back. We're your host, Savannah.
And Kaylin. Welcome back to Two Candid Cousins. We are on episode 22, and today we're going to be continuing Savannah's IFB cult story, or Independent Fundamental Baptist cult story. Disclaimer, we normally do not talk about religion on this podcast. We're choosing to discuss this topic to raise awareness and educate. We're not bashing a religion or Christianity. We're simply sharing Savannah's experience. And of course, if you or someone that you know may be or has been involved in a cult and would like some resources, we'll be sure to link them in the description of this video. Also, if you have not seen part 1 of this story, check the description as well. We'll make sure to link it, and you're going to want to watch that first to get the background of the cult and understand kind of how they work. So this story will make more sense. And I do want to start with some trigger warnings. There is going to be talk of physical abuse, mental abuse and manipulation, religious trauma, and rape. All right, so let's get into it. Are you ready, Savannah?
I'm ready.
All right. So, can you explain a little bit how the cult views women?
Oh, yeah. So this is a little bit of a deeper question, but I'd say it's one of the fundamentals of the fundamentalist. So there's this thing, and we'll display it on the screen as well. It's called the umbrella of protection. And it's a great outline or guide of how the cult views men and women, children, pastors, so on and so forth. I'll just read it real quick. And then we should have this up on the screen as well for you guys to follow along. So, how it goes is you have a few different umbrellas, and the top one is going to be Christ, God. He's the top umbrella, the top poncho. And it says under there that Christ has the authority to forgive sins passed down to the pastors. So, next you go to the pastors. Now, the
Okay.
pastors protect the church, but also they oversee the husbands. And then you
Mm,
move down to the husband. Now, the husband protects the family and provides for the family under the guidance of the pastor in Christ. Now, you go all the way down to the totem pole and you have the wife. And she takes care of the children and is the manager of the home. And then, obviously, underneath the wife are the children at the very lowest end of the totem pole.
all right.
So this is something that I believe Jack Hiles, who is the founder of the IFB, as we talked about last episode.
God says when the troubles come, he said fight.
He created this guide or like diagram to kind of show how the rules should go in IFB churches and homes. So there's a few different roles that women have. One is in the church and the other is in the home. Now, I'm going to read a few KJV Bible verses to kind of give some context of an insight of how men in the church and pastors view women.
Okay.
And these are also the verses that they base their beliefs and that umbrella of protection diagram off of. So it gives a lot of
Gotcha.
context.
Okay.
So the first one is going to be 1 Timothy 2:11 through 15. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection, which subjection pretty much means submission, obedience, whatever.
Yeah.
But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression, or in the wrong. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety. So, for those of you that aren't versed in KJV or the church in general, those verses are pretty much saying the woman needs to learn her place. She needs to be quiet in church. She needs to be submissive and subjected to the pastor and her husband and other men in the church. She should not teach or have authority over a man. And he's also saying that when it comes down to Adam and Eve, this is all because Adam was made first and then Eve was made for
Right.
him. They believe that Eve was made as a helpmeet. All women are helpmeets for men, is what they call them. There's actually a book I read called Created to Be a Helpmeet. And it's like a
Wow.
guide for single women on how to be the best helpmeet you can for your husband in the future and how to best serve him. So, yeah, it's
I feel like
something.
this is a great example of how the IFB takes everything in the Bible very literally.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And then another one, it says, let's see. 1 Corinthians 14:34. This one's a little more to the point. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. I think that's pretty clear what that's saying.
Yeah.
Tell your woman
Yeah.
to shut up in the church and listen.
Look her right in her God-given eyeballs and say, shut your mouth. Just shut up.
Thankfully, like, my pastor wasn't as crazy like that with it.
Yeah.
He would always have this argument where he said, and I thought this sounded amazing when I was younger, like a teenager.
Mhm.
He would say, men and women are created equal. Everyone is created equal under God. However, men and women do have different roles. And that was like the catch,
Yeah.
you know? So it
Yeah.
sounds like men and women are the same, they're equal, they're partners, but when it comes down to it, you have to stick to your role.
Mhm.
So
You have
they
to
act
know
like
your place.
they believe that they're equal, but deep down, like underneath all those language and words, you know, like that's not what they mean.
Yeah.
So most people in the IFB believe in something called complementarianism. It's a mouthful. And they
Yeah.
basically believe that men and women are equal under God, but they have different roles and they're made to complement each other. Complementarianism. And what most people like out in the world or like normal everyday people believe
Yeah.
is something called egalitarianism. That means that you are actually equal partners in a marriage. Like,
Right.
not different roles, not the husband isn't the head of anything, the wife isn't ahead of anything, you're both equal playing field.
50-50. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the complementarianism is like the IFB's way of like kind of combating that. And they make
Yeah.
it sound good and put it in a pretty little package, but it still means that you're gonna be subjected to other men in the church and your husband.
And
I mean,
misogyny.
it is and misogyny and the patriarchy. Love the
Yeah.
patriarchy there.
Love that for us.
Um, and then another verse is 1 Corinthians 11:3. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. So that's also pretty self-explanatory
Yeah.
there. And then I'll read just one more. Now, this is like the backbone of the woman's role in a marriage, these verses. These are quoted and
Yeah.
preached on over and over and over. It's Ephesians 5:22 through 33. I might not read all them because it's just like I might
Yeah.
skip
A
through a
lot.
little bit. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. So you're literally comparing the husband to the Lord, which
Mhm.
is a big comparison that they do in the church a lot.
Don't they also do that, like, for the children to their father? Basically compare them like the Lord?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
if you disobey your father, you're basically disobeying the Lord directly
Yes,
almost?
exactly. You got it exactly right. Basically, the husband or I mean, we'll get into it a little more bit more when we
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about the
Not
man's
trying to jump
role.
ahead, sorry.
No, you're good, you're good. We'll just get into that more then, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
definitely right. And then when it comes to so they believe, and it says in the Bible, that the church is the bride of Christ. So that's also another I know, it's creepy, it's icky. But it's also another reason that the IFB views, they like to compare a husband and a wife to Christ and the church a lot.
Mm.
And, like, those roles and
Yeah,
those situations, which I always thought was a little strange.
yeah.
And then it says, "For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church," like I just said,
Mm,
"and he's
mhm.
the savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything." I guess I'll pretty much just stop there because the rest of it talks about a man's role. But yeah,
Oh,
it's pretty
okay.
much saying, So, therefore, as the church is obedient or follows Christ, they're underneath Christ. So let the wives be to their own husbands subject to them. So
Mm.
I don't really see how there could be any confusion of how men are ahead of the woman.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think they
exactly.
like to twist it and manipulate it and convolute it so it doesn't sound bad because
Yeah.
they know today's culture and how
Yeah.
we're all very anti-misogynistic and anti the patriarchy. So of course they try to present it in such a way that it doesn't scare people off.
Right.
Now, so obviously the women's role in the church, we've talked about that. They're not allowed to preach according to the IFB. They're not allowed to preach, they're not allowed to
Wow.
teach men or even like teenage boys, like 13 and older. They are not allowed to I think even pray in public in front of men.
What?
I think I could be wrong, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I don't think I've ever had a woman pray during church
Yeah.
over the men. And then when you talk about the home, like I said in episode 1, it's a very 1950s version of Christianity. So when you picture the 50s, you picture the woman in a cute little dress with her hair and makeup done at home. She's in the kitchen, she's slaving away over the oven all day.
Yeah.
And,
With her apron.
she's carrying like a baby at the hip while she's like vacuuming the house.
Yeah.
So, and the man is gone for the day and he's, providing for the family at his job and he comes home and he gets waited on. That's basically what they expect the women to be at home. And it's really difficult, especially for women like me, where homemaking doesn't come naturally. So
Mhm.
it's like this expectation that you have to be perfect and perfectly
Right.
organized and perfectly put together like 100% of the time, or you're a failure of a wife, you're a failure to your husband and your kids. And that's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure.
Right. My husband's gonna see me looking like a hobo walking around the house.
Me. Yeah, unfortunately,
And
that's what my husband gets to deal with.
I feel like with you, ever since you've, like, been with Ricky and been
Mhm,
married, you've realized that even though you still have some traditional views
mhm.
of, like, men and women, like, you
Yeah,
wouldn't mind being, like, the stay-at-home mom if you needed to be or
right.
things like that.
Mhm.
It's you still have, like, a mix. Like, you want it to be more 50-50, but at the same
Yeah.
time, you do have kind of, like, those gender roles a little bit within your home life.
Right. But there's a difference, and the difference is I'm choosing to have that role.
Exactly.
I'm choosing to adapt it. The women in the IFB, they're not choosing it. They act like they're
No.
choosing it. They act like it's what they want, but they feel guilty if they don't. Like it's pressured upon them. And you're taught and brainwashed your whole life like this is what you're supposed to do. This is how it's supposed to be. So it's really hard for them
Yeah.
to deviate from that, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And another thing is like when it comes to big financial decisions in the home between a
Mhm.
marriage, a man and a woman, sometimes in the IFB, the man doesn't consult the woman. It's
Yeah.
since he's the provider, he's the controller of the finances, and she doesn't get much of a say. And she might get an allowance or something. But when it
Yeah.
comes to like the big decisions, he believes that
Like
he has
buying a
every right.
car or, like,
Mhm.
big stuff like that.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure like with
Now
the home and stuff, they discuss it because that's like a big
yeah.
thing, but you know,
Now would he have to talk to the pastor about that? Like, if let's say he wanted to buy a car,
yeah.
you have to get the pastor's permission kind of, right? Or, like, advice maybe?
You don't have to, but I'd say
Yeah.
most members do generally seek out his advice in
Yeah.
any kind of big thing. Like, I remember
Mhm.
when I was which we'll get into this in the next episode, but when I was basically forced to go to Bible college,
Yeah.
I had to meet with my pastor and his wife at Chick-fil-A, and we pretty much sat down and I had to tell them, like, "This is where I'm thinking about going," because it wasn't originally that strict Bible Baptist college I was gonna go to. I wanted to go to just a Christian college that was
Yeah.
actually accredited
Mhm.
and wasn't Baptist. Like, anyone from any denomination could go as long as they were Christian. You could
Yeah.
wear jeans there, all that. It was much less strict. And
Yeah.
that's where I wanted to go originally. But my pastor and his wife basically convinced me or advised me that it wasn't a good idea because it's easier for me to fall into the bad crowds that way. and that I could be easily influenced. And they also didn't agree with the fact that the Christian college had a college church, basically,
Yeah.
instead of a home church that's an actual church that they
Mm.
would join and be a part of, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
At least they had a
because of
church.
yeah, but because of that and oh, also they had a problem because they weren't entirely Baptist, which
Yeah,
yeah,
of course.
culty. But the problem with that is that because of what they said and had advised, my parents had finalized the decision to send me to prison, the
Yeah,
Bible
yeah,
college that they ended
basically.
up going to. So yeah, like it's recommended and it's advised to talk to them about big decisions, but it's not necessarily required. But
Yeah.
most members
But you'll
do
be
it.
frowned upon if you don't, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Or you just like you want the pastor and his wife to be involved because the more involved they are in your life, the closer you might be with them and the more
Yeah,
notoriety you have in the church.
yeah.
So it's just like a combo of things. There's a lot of church
Mhm.
politics involved here.
Yeah.
Um, now we talked about financial decisions, but when it comes to voting, this is definitely something we need to talk about.
Wow.
So some men do not let their wives vote once they're married. And I would say the majority of women that I knew didn't vote. My mom did because she, didn't see she in her eyes, she was like, "Oh, well, that's one other vote that could count."
Yeah.
But a lot of men were very controlling in that regard, and they would say, "Well, we're voting for the same person anyways because you have to agree with me on this. And since we're doing that and I'm your headship, I'm, like, above you,
Head of
and
household,
I
basically.
I represent our family and our household, then I may as well just do it by myself."
That's
So
so weird. That's
you're
such a
taking
weird
away,
mindset.
like you're taking away that autonomy and basic human rights that women
Yeah.
fought so hard for so long ago, not even that long ago, actually.
Yeah.
Um, it's just really messed up.
Mhm.
Another thing that'll happen is women, when they get married, they like to infantilize themselves, basically make themselves seem smaller and meek and mild and sweet, and
Yeah.
just a lot of them end up talking in, like, a little bit of a baby voice.
Mhm.
Like, anyone that's ever seen the
Or they're
Duggars.
super soft spoken.
Yeah, exactly, because women aren't supposed to be loud or crass or whatever. Um, but anyways, you're supposed to sweetly submit to your husband
Yeah.
and, all this kinda stuff. There is this woman, Michelle Duggar,
Mhm.
from 19 Kids and Counting. She's the matriarch of the family that popped out all those children. She
Yeah.
speaks in a very strange voice, like, I'll try to give an example. "Now, Jedediah, I told you you need to put your clothes away, okay?" Like that.
Ugh.
Like, this sickeningly sweet, kind of childish,
Fake. Yeah.
fake tone, and it's always with a smile even if they're getting onto a kid. It's
You know
always
what it
like,
reminds me
"Mhm."
of?
Uh,
I don't know if you've seen it, but Miss Rachel.
no, I haven't.
Miss Rachel's like a kids YouTuber, but she
Yeah.
talks like that, and she talks, like, very, like, soft spoken, but, like, very dramatic, you know?
It kind of is like that, though. A lot of these wives
Yeah.
and moms, they seem like I would say, they have similarities to, like, a preschool teacher or a kindergarten
Yeah.
teacher, except
Yes.
that voice and that persona is turned on 100% of the time.
Ugh. So they
Yeah.
talk to adults like that?
Yeah. Especially their husbands, and I think it's another way to seem small and,
And
like,
submissive.
submissive and childlike to their husbands, which, if you think about it, there's
You
a
know
lot of
that's what
things
they
under the
like.
surface. Yeah, I was about to say.
Most of them, at
Um,
least.
so besides the infantilization, that's a hard word to say,
Mm,
another thing that women do in the home is they're very focused on something called femininity, and they call it
mm.
biblical femininity. There's books on it, there's podcasts on it, there's
Yeah,
YouTubers that speak on this, like how to be biblically feminine. And it's basically, like I said, very 1950s. Like the woman
yeah,
has to have a certain body type, be very trim and fit. She has to dress in feminine dresses and outfits and skirts that are modest. Make sure her hair is done and it's clean and it, um, what's the word, is suitable for her.
Yeah.
Like, when you wear like I said in episode 1, when they wear their hair and makeup, it should be to complement their femininity and enhance it, not to
Yeah.
take away from it, is pretty much what they say.
Yeah.
So it's very, like, retro, I'd say, like, the makeup
Mm.
looks and the hair looks and everything. And it's very performative because clearly, like, it's not who they really are 100% of the time. I
Yeah,
can
just
imagine.
constantly masking, like, what the heck?
Right. I cannot imagine walking around my home and, like, having to put on a full outfit and do my hair and makeup every morning and no.
It's like that feeling of when you work an office job and for 8 hours
Mhm.
you mask and you,
Yes.
like, act like someone else and you're very professional, and then you get home and you're finally like, "Oh, I can just be myself," but then you get
Yeah.
home or you are home and you still can't,
Mhm.
like
Yeah, because your husband comes home, and then you have to greet him at the door and be sweet and still take care of the kids, still make dinner, clean up after dinner, make sure he has
yeah,
everything he needs. It's a whole ordeal, and it's
all while being
exhausting.
smiley and nice
Mhm.
and
Yes.
feminine.
Which I will say not every IFB wife is like this 100% of the time. There are some that
Yeah,
I've met that are very, like, much more chill, and their husbands don't hold them to as high of a standard, which is nice
at
to see.
home, yeah, mhm,
But it's kind of rare, I would say.
yeah,
And usually those types of families are the families that, yeah, they attend the cult, they're involved, but they're not as involved, and they're a little less
mhm,
conservative, like, personally in their home life.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. I would say that's, yeah, that's the woman's role in a snapshot.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
How
of
would you
course.
say they, treat men? Let's
Oh,
flip the
man.
roles here.
Yeah, well, as you can
Or
imagine,
view
it's
men.
very yeah, it's very, they're on a pedestal. Most men are always on a pedestal,
Yeah,
and they have all the authority in the church, they have all the authority at home, and if you think about it, that leads to a power imbalance, which can be
yeah,
very, very dangerous and lead to emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical, sexual abuse.
yeah,
And this is when, the marital rape, like we talked about in part 1,
yeah,
where that really plays in.
yeah,
Because if you, as the woman, believe that you are inferior to your husband and he lords over you and you're required to give him yourself 100% of the
like, that's
time.
your purpose in life is to
Right.
what
Like,
did
you
you
don't
call
have
her? Be a wait, what did you say
a
that
helpmeet.
it's called? A help me?
Yeah.
That's
And,
crazy.
like, these women don't have any, like, full bodily autonomy whatsoever. Like, they say that your body is your husband's when you marry him.
That's
You
so
guys become
disgusting.
one, but your body's your husband's.
And it's not
Um,
like, "Oh, your husband's body's yours too, don't worry." No, his body's
yeah,
his own.
exactly, exactly. And, of course, there's these expectations with sex in the home
Yeah,
that men have the higher sex drive, and so we must cater to them or they're gonna lust after other women, and you don't want him to do that, do you? So it's like,
mhm,
it's the woman's responsibility for the man when he is in sexual sin. For example, if your husband is somehow addicted to porn, or he cheated on you, or he's
it's your fault.
lusting after women, it's because of something that you did or didn't do. Either you're
Yeah,
not being respectful enough to him, you're not keeping yourself looking good enough or young enough, or you're not giving your body to him 100% of the time. So
yeah,
you're responsible, it's your fault. Which actually there I'm not gonna say too much about it because like we said in part 1, there are some stories that aren't my own, and I don't wanna
yeah,
expose anyone or say anything, but I will say very generally, there was a young wife, who was married in the church, and I know that she was counseled by my pastor and his wife with her husband in the same room, and I think he had, like, 2 mistresses or at least 1 mistress, and she
yeah.
found out about it. And the pastor's wife looked at her and said, "Well, what did you do?" To basically imply, like, your husband cheated on you, he has this mistress because you're not doing something for
Yeah,
him.
yeah,
So, that left me with a very icky feeling. And that's how, these church leaders are viewing it too,
Yeah.
which makes me wonder how much abuse, because that is abuse, I'm sorry, how much
Yeah.
gaslighting and manipulation was done by the leaders of the church to
Yeah.
couples, especially
To
young
cover
couples.
things up.
Right. Because, like, knowing that that conversation happened behind closed doors, it's like, okay, what other conversations are going
Yeah.
on that we don't know about, you
And
know?
that's when you were there and it was like 30 people. Now you said there's what, like 300 people, 300
Yeah,
plus?
on a Sunday morning, 300 plus. They're even thinking about expanding, which is scary to me. I really hope they
Yeah.
aren't able to do that. But yeah, they basically treat men as if they're these uncontrolled animals that need to be satisfied with sex.
Yeah.
And they never think about the option that maybe the woman has a high sex drive, or
Yeah.
maybe
Or a
she has
low one.
needs. Yeah. Or maybe she has needs that need to be met, it's always they
Yeah.
just instantly assume because the man is the man, he has a higher sex drive and he needs it all the time. So, it doesn't matter what the wife wants or what she needs or anything like that. And also the men's role in the home, I mean, we talked about that a little bit, but a big thing that happens is financial abuse,
Yeah.
especially if the wife is stay at home. She's a stay-at-home wife, stay-at-home mom, because the husband is the provider. He has access to the finances 100% of the time. Sometimes the wife doesn't have access to that. And if she
Yeah.
does, it's under certain rules and stipulations, like,
Mhm.
"Oh, you can't touch this, you can't touch that." Or sometimes he'll award her, like, a weekly allowance or a monthly allowance that he'll transfer to, like, a separate bank account for her to use.
Right.
And it's up to her to kinda, like, budget that and make sure it's, spread out and everything. But if you think about it, in a normal relationship, if the wife is a stay-at-home wife or something, usually, she's not gonna be financially abused if it's a healthy relationship. Like,
Yeah.
typically, the husband would equally share finances with her, even if he's the provider, even if he's the main income,
They would
and
have a
usually.
shared account.
Right, and
All of
usually
that,
the wife
yeah.
will subsidize for that in other ways by taking care of the home or whatever, if it's her choice and
Yeah.
her decision. Now, with this kinda situation, it's really easy for the husband to be like, "You need money? Oh, sorry, sorry," and, like, hold it just out
Yep.
of reach for her, you know? Make her work for it, do certain
Like, bribe
favors.
her.
Exactly. And he has the option to withhold it from her too, which is very concerning. So what
Yeah.
happens, let's say, if this woman in the IFB cult marries this man, come to find out he's abusive and it's not a fairy tale like she thought it would be. When she needs to escape or leave, what income, what funds does she have to her name
Yeah.
to leave? Literally
And then let
nothing.
alone, like, not even just the funds is the only issue, then you
Mhm.
have a whole community against you that's
Exactly.
working together to make sure things do not go your way.
Which that did happen with a few couples in the church or the cult
Yeah.
when the wife left because of abuse or cheating or something that the husband did. Somehow, the husband was still allowed to serve in the church and
Mhm.
be a big part of the church while the woman was isolated and basically cut off and gossiped about. They instantly believed the husband's version of the story instead of even asking the wife or wanting to hear her side. Just
Yeah.
instantly catered to him and act like, "Oh, it must have been something that she did," you know? So
Yeah.
it's really messed up, and it's just not a good dynamic at all to have
No.
in any way. And then, of course, you have, like, the pastor, and he's like we talked about, man's the head of the home, the pastor's the head of the church. He has pretty much the ultimate authority in the church.
Mhm.
If you have a problem with someone in the church, you need to involve the pastor. If you if you have a problem at home,
Mhm.
you consult the pastor. You don't call the cops. You don't involve a therapist, an actual licensed therapist or psychologist. You
Yeah.
involve the pastor. And that actually happened for me at home, which I'll get into that in a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah. He's very heavily involved in your home life, which to
Yeah.
me is very dangerous, especially if gossip is, like, a big thing there, because your
Yeah.
business just gets passed around like crazy.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's the
Oh,
man's
sorry.
role. No, you're good.
I'm so bad at, like, realizing when you're done answering the question.
No, I went off on a little rabbit trail anyways, you're all
That's
good.
okay. Okay. So next question. What
Mhm.
is a quiverful?
It's a weird word, right?
Very.
So, basically, it's this term or this movement, the quiverful movement, which is based off of this Bible verse, another Bible verse, Psalm 127 something or another. And it says, "Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are sons born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them." So, it's basically a Bible verse that's saying when you have kids, the more kids you have, the better because you have a quiver, which I don't know if you know what a quiver is, but it's what holds your arrows. Like the little
Okay.
like pack or bag or whatever you want to call it, satchel thing that
Mhm.
you keep all your arrows in, like back in the old days when you would go to
Mhm.
battle and you'd like sling it around your neck or on your back and you would pull it
So
out to
basically, it's like saying that your kids are your army almost or like your
yes,
weapons.
that's exactly what it's saying because there's a lot of there's a lot of Christian nationalism tied into the IFB where you
Mhm.
want your children and the kids and the youth of the church to infect the political scene and basically like
Mhm.
make a change to where everyone in the world or in your country follows like your rules and your religion basically. You could
Okay.
look a little bit more into Christian nationalism if you want to, but it's a big thing with the IFB and so is like
Yeah.
patriotism, a huge thing. But
Mhm.
yeah, the goal is basically to use your kids as arrows out into the secular world. You send them out for God, and they're these little soldiers that either go into the ministry or they're a
Yeah.
good example to other people that aren't believers.
Like a
Um,
missionary.
exactly. They evangelize, so on and so forth. So, in their eyes, the more kids you have, the better because that's more arrows you have for God. So,
Wow.
when you look at people like the Duggars, or there's another
Yeah.
family that has their own, reality show that are also IFB called the Bates family.
Oh, I never heard of
Um,
them.
yeah, they're very popular. They're a little less strict now than they used to be, but yeah,
Yeah.
they are a quiverful family. So that's why a lot of families, like in my church or in the IFB in general, they usually have, I'd say, like 6 plus kids.
Yeah.
And of course, not everyone is able to have that many kids or follow that, but for the most part, it's heavily encouraged, which is also why birth control and sterilization, such as like vasectomies or anything like that, of
Yeah.
any kind, are a no-no in the cult.
Now, what if,
So,
like, you're a woman and you, like, medically need to get your uterus removed or something?
I mean, I'm sure they'd make an exception for that. I don't really know because I don't know anyone
Yeah.
that's been in that situation,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure about that. But when it comes
Mhm.
down to, like, taking birth control pills or using contraception or vasectomies, like, that's no, because you're stopping God's will from being complete,
Yeah.
basically.
I know you said last time that if, let's say, a woman had a very difficult pregnancy and then she got pregnant
Mhm.
again, then they're like, "Oh, well, you need to deal with it."
Yeah, basically. There's no other options there. It's,
Yeah.
you have to have this kid or you're being disobedient and selfish to God.
Yeah.
But a horrible thing is when these women have horrible complications or traumatic pregnancies, traumatic
Yeah.
births, and then they jump right back into it without trying to stop or delay anything, and their bodies are still healing and
Yeah.
their bodies are still traumatized as well as their minds, and you're jumping right into a pregnancy again without a break. I mean, I know some women
Yeah.
that were pregnant every year for, like, 15 years, 10 to 15
Wow.
years, and literally no breaks in between. I can't imagine. Like, that's gotta be so hard on your body.
It's really just like your
So
cattle or something.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. You're supposed to trust God for as many kids as he sees fit, is what they say,
Mhm.
because they believe that God opens and closes the womb,
Yeah.
which is kind of weird and
That
misogynistic.
is weird.
Like, once again, going into women don't have their own bodily autonomy or control over
Yeah,
anything, like, God
exactly.
chooses, like, when your womb should be closed or when it should be open. So, like,
Yeah,
if you are barren, for example, like, you can't have kids, then either you're being punished by God for something that you did, and this is a
yeah,
real sentiment that people give, or it's just not time for you to have a kid yet. Like, he doesn't see that you're ready yet, basically.
yeah.
So,
Now,
yeah.
you know how and you might not have an answer to this
Mm,
because I don't know if they talk openly to everyone about
mhm.
it, but
Yeah.
let's say you know how when a woman gives birth, you're supposed to wait 6 weeks
Mhm.
until you have sex again?
Mhm.
Do they follow that? Do you know? Do they at
I
least
know
wait,
of
like
at least 2 couples that didn't
wow.
because the husband couldn't wait,
Yeah, that's what I
which
would imagine.
proves to me that you don't respect your wife or love her at all, because if you truly love or
Yeah,
respect her, how could you do that to her?
yeah,
Like, knowing, and that also ties into, like, how the IFB, the cult, they don't really, believe in doctors or, like,
yeah,
the medical practices or anything like that. It kinda leads into that.
mhm,
They don't trust them, their medical direction. But yeah, there's lots of evidence and studies that show you're supposed to abstain from it from that time period for her
yeah.
to heal. But yeah, I do know of
So,
at least 2 families.
are a lot of the IFB, would you say, like, anti-vax?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Almost every single one in my cult that I knew are. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I
And
figured.
they have, like, studies behind it and everything because I used to be that way too, just from
Yeah,
influence, you know? But I haven't really looked into these studies as an adult out of the cult to see
yeah,
how well they
yeah,
hold up and everything. I'm sure
mhm.
there's some vaccines that, you shouldn't get as, like, a baby
Yeah,
or something. But for
yeah,
the most part, they are here to protect us, so.
but just, like, the normal, like, when you're
Mhm.
2, you get your shots, and then when you're 4, you get your shots, like, that type of
Yeah.
annual doctor's visit type of thing is what
Yeah,
I mean,
that's no, and a lot of them don't even have a pediatrician.
Wow.
And I know, like, the pastor's family and stuff and other families, like, they didn't go to the dentist, like, I don't think
Yeah,
ever.
wow.
So just a lot of that,
Yeah,
and, like,
yeah,
a lot of holistic remedies and essential oils because I told you how the
yeah,
women have a lot of multi-level marketing schemes, and one of them was selling essential oils. My mom did that. I actually did it
yeah,
for a little bit.
yeah, I remember.
Um, they literally believe that essential oils fix everything. Which I think
So
they
we
can be very helpful. Aromatherapy is proven
Yeah,
to be
but
helpful, but
there's need for medicine sometimes,
yeah.
I'm all for the natural medicinal,
Yeah, same here, when
things,
you
but
can, but it needs to also
yeah,
be, like, scientifically proven and sound
right.
and safe.
So I think it's safe to add medical neglect to the list of, abuse.
Absolutely, especially because 'cause we're talking about kids now, like, the problem with having too many kids and the
Mhm.
IFB is that, first of all, there's not enough one-on-one time with each kid.
Yeah.
And even though my family wasn't big, I know for a fact, like, from firsthand from my friends, from other kids in the church, they were not getting proper adequate time with each parent.
Yeah, and then
There
they're
were
treated like they help raise the kids, right? The oldest ones help with the youngest ones and that type of deal.
right, that's the other point is parentification happens when
Mm.
you go into these large families because the mom and the dad don't have the capacity to have one-on-one time and raise these kids 24/7
Yeah,
because there's so many of them, so many different age
yeah,
groups. The mom will usually focus on, like, let's say, the baby at the time,
mhm.
and she'll let the older kids take care of the younger kids, which is parentification. And
Yep.
now that I'm older and I've been in therapy, I know that parentification is not a good thing.
No.
And you're putting this responsibility in, all this work on a child, someone that's still a child themselves, and
That still needs a parent.
expecting them to fully know how to take care of, their younger siblings, and
Yeah,
if something goes wrong, you blame them, and it's their fault, and I just think
yeah,
that's too much pressure on a kid.
yeah,
Like, you should
yeah,
be able to be a kid, you shouldn't be a parent while you're a kid. They leave the home, they get married at 18 or 19. Within a
yeah,
year of marriage, they've already had their own kid. So you're jumping
yep,
from raising your siblings to raising your kid with no breaks in between.
you don't ever have time to be a kid.
But yeah, it leads to a lot of neglect just because you don't have enough time with them. And also because the more kids you have, the more of a financial burden they are. And
Yeah.
most of these parents, they don't base having kids off of financial freedom or financial
No.
security. Obviously, they just trust God to give them as many as He wants
Yeah.
them to have and trust Him
Yeah.
to provide. But the thing is, what happens when God doesn't provide?
It's kind of like hypocritical too because they have that pyramid of,
Mhm.
you know, God, then pastor, then husband, then
Yeah.
wife, then kids, but then the kids are playing the wife role in a way or the
Exactly,
mother role.
exactly. And
So it
what's
goes
even,
against
like
their own teachings.
exactly, and what's even worse is that it's not even the boys that are really required to do it. I mean, sometimes the older boys
Yeah.
will take care of the younger boys and, like, keep them under their wing, but they're not expected to, like, feed the baby, change the diapers, go pick them up in the
Yeah.
middle of the night when they're crying. Like, I know our pastor's daughter, when she was still a teenager herself, like 13 to 16, somewhere around there, she literally would wake up in the middle of the night, one of the babies was crying, and had to watch TV at 2, 3 in the morning and rock them back to sleep for however long it would take. And the problem with that is, she was still in school. She still had many, many hobbies and extracurricular activities outside of her homeschooling education. And she was exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
And I wonder why. I
Yeah.
had to do the same thing. I was 18, so it's a little different, but my younger sister was 15, somewhere around there
Yeah.
when our littlest sister was born. And I remember, like, we had to help almost just as much as my mom, like,
Yeah.
staying up and feeding her and helping her in the middle of the night when she's crying, and honestly, I would say that my younger sister was, like, my littlest sister's second mom, easily.
Yeah.
Now,
Oh,
I
yeah, I
wasn't
agree.
around as much because I was working and I was getting ready to leave for Bible college, but, yeah, that was definitely something
Yeah.
that was the thing.
Yeah.
And also because of the finance part, the kids don't get as many opportunities as they should have. So
Mhm.
they'll get hand-me-down clothes from people in the church or other siblings. They don't ever
Yeah.
get, like, their own new clothes.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to, like, cars, they have to get, like, the most beat up whatever, and either they
Mhm.
pay for it and they've been saving for, like, forever, or the parents pay for it, but it's super beat up and not very safe. So, there's
Yeah.
just, like, a bunch of things that go into play there, especially when it comes to, like, we talked about, like, medical visits and everything. Like, they don't have the money or the healthcare to be able to afford
Yeah.
medical for all their kids, all their 10
Mhm.
kids, 6 kids, however many. And then also when it comes to higher education, I honestly
Yeah.
believe that that's one of the reasons that Bible college is so pushed and encouraged. They wouldn't be able to afford secular college even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
With all those
Yeah, it
kids,
makes
there's no
sense.
way. And especially
Yeah.
encouraging, like, the girls to stay home and not go to Bible college, and not even Bible
Mhm.
college, because they're like, "Well, what's the point? You're just gonna get married anyways." But in
Yeah, and
reality,
you're
that's
and you're not
them.
gonna work or anything, like, why do you need
Right.
a career?
But it is them just saving more money?
Yeah.
So and it's very messed up too because especially when you have a lot of kids or any kids really in the IFB, I've noticed the parents view them, like we talked about, as mini Christian soldiers
Yeah.
or little clones or versions of themselves instead of individual people with, like, their own autonomy, their own rights, their own hobbies and likes and dislikes and goals. They're very enmeshed with the parents.
No wonder so many people that are members of the IFB are narcissistic.
That's what I'm saying. It literally is a breeding ground for narcissists, groomers, pedophiles, abusers. It's so
Yep.
dangerous, and that's why we're talking about it, because a lot of people, they'll see, like, a cute little Baptist church, around their town, or they're living in the Bible Belt, and it's normal to see it everywhere, but you gotta realize, like, not every Baptist church is what it
Is a
seems like.
normal Baptist church, yeah.
Right. It could be a cult? So it's
Yeah.
people need to know this because I feel like a lot of people don't.
Yeah. What now, IFB churches, do they publicly label themselves as IFB? Because like, how would you know?
Yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes you'll see it like either on their sign, it'll say like I'm just gonna give an example, a random
Yeah.
name. First Baptist Church. There's a lot of those, right?
Yeah.
So under First Baptist Church, on their sign outside, it'll usually say something like independent, fundamental, Bible believing, like
Oh,
something
okay, got
similar to
you.
that. And if it doesn't say it
Yeah.
on the sign,
Anything
it'll probably
independent.
yeah, if it doesn't say it on the sign, it'll probably say it either on their website
Yeah.
or, their oh, man, it's been so long, I don't remember
The
what they're
pamphlet.
called. Their pamphlet for that they give out each
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what those are called anymore. Oh my goodness.
Ah!
That's a good
You're
sign.
brainwashed.
Exactly, exactly. I'm deprogrammed.
Now, are there any examples of the IFB home life that you wanna share?
Yes. Now, first to talk about this, I need to talk about a book. A very important, messed up book that was passed around in my church and the cult and other churches that we were associated with. It was called To Train Up a Child, and you can still buy it now. You can still purchase it. And the authors of this book are a couple called Michael and Debbie Pearl. They had their own ministry called No Greater Joy Ministry. And it's basically about raising kids. That's like their main priority.
Yeah.
Debbie Pearl, the wife, she's actually the author of the book I was telling you about where I read Created to be a Helpmeet. That's her
Oh,
book.
yes.
So yeah, they have written a lot of books. They do a lot of like conferences and seminaries. They would visit a lot of churches. Mostly I'd say in the late 90s, early 2000s was when their popularity was the highest.
Okay.
So yeah, they wrote this book and my mom had the book. People in the church would gift it to other parents or new families for them to
Yeah.
read and then raise their kids based off of this book. So I'm going to read a few little like excerpts of the book to give some context about how they view discipline and what they tell parents to do.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess I'll get started on that.
Okay.
So the first excerpt is called The Magic Wand. It says, don't think of the rod. Now, when it's talking about the rod, just for context, it means it's based off of that Bible verse or even saying that other people use called spare the rod, spoil the child.
Yeah.
So they see when they talk about the rod, they're talking about a spanking instrument or tool.
Mhm.
If that child is going to have authority, mother, you got to let that man be the authority.
Punish him with the rod severely. If he screams too hard with the first five, gets hysterical, wait. You know, a little psychological terror is sometimes more effective than the pain.
It says, don't think of the rod as a weapon of defense or a show of force. Think of the rod as a magic wand. The first time parents see its restorative powers, they are amazed. Picture a child of any age who is miserable, complaining, a bully to the other kids. When you look at him, all you can see is the inside of a bottom lip. Every device has failed to bring relief. The kid feels that he is living in foreign, occupied territory. He is obviously plotting the day of throwing off the yoke. Bribed, threatened, or swatted, he only gets worse. Fail to use the rod on this child, and you are creating a Nazi. I
Oh my
still
god.
marvel.
Not
I
a
still
Nazi.
I still marvel at the power of the little rod. After a short explanation about bad attitudes and the need to love, patiently and calmly apply the rod to his backside. Somehow, after 8 or 10 licks, which is actually a lot, the poison is transformed into gushing love and contentment. The world becomes a beautiful place. A brand new child emerges. It makes an adult stare at the rod in wonder, trying to see what magic is contained therein. What?
What the heck?
Like, this man is literally romanticizing
Beating a
spanking
child.
your child. Yeah, beating your child. Thank you.
Yeah, because there's
It
a difference, like, I am one of those people that don't agree with spanking at all, but
yeah.
I understand that there is a difference between spanking and beating. That's
Mhm.
beating.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, 8 to 10. And I love how he uses the language licks because it
Yeah,
sounds much more old-fashioned and wholesome, and it doesn't sound as harsh. Now, what if he had
yeah.
said after 8 or 10
Hits or beat.
hits? Yeah, or beatings. That sounds a lot harsher, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's funny how you can see the language that they use in this book to make it seem more wholesome and innocent. It's very interesting.
And I do just have to say this sounds like an infomercial for, like, beating your child.
That's exactly what this book is. It's
Like,
a whole
jeez.
infomercial for it. So now we know, like, how they expect the IFB and this couple expects a parent to view their spanking tool or spanking their child.
Yeah,
Now I'm gonna read a little bit about how they view the parent's role over the child.
okay.
So it says, part of his training, as in the child, is to come submissively. However, if you are just beginning to institute training on an already rebellious child who runs from discipline, I mean, what child doesn't, and is too incoherent to listen, then use whatever force is necessary to bring him to bay. If you have to sit on him to spank him, then do not hesitate and hold him there until he is surrendered. Prove that you are bigger, tougher, more patiently enduring, and are unmoved by his wailing. Defeat him totally. Accept no conditions for surrender, no compromise. You are to rule over him as a benevolent sovereign. Your word is final.
It sounds like someone that's trying to train a dog.
Well, we actually have a little clip that we'll probably insert here about Michael Pearl. He did an interview with Anderson Cooper, pretty much talking about
Oh,
how
yeah.
like training a child is the same as training an animal,
The rules, the principles, techniques for training an animal and a human are the same.
which is so dehumanizing to the child, right?
Right.
Like, once again, they're not their own individual, you know?
Mhm.
They believe that they need to break the will or beat the will out of a child because
Mhm.
the IFB believe that children, when they're born into the world, they're born inherently sinful and wicked. And that before they're old enough to start making their own unwise, rebellious decisions, you need to beat the sin out of them. So, a little context.
Yeah.
The next quote I'm gonna read is about Debbie Pearl, the wife, her example of a good spanking tool. And we'll display a picture of this too for you guys to see like what
Yeah.
it looks like because you need to see it to believe it because this is crazy. She says, later, a plumber's supply line is a good spanking tool. You could get it at Walmart or any hardware store. Ask for a plastic 4th-inch supply line. They come in different lengths and several colors, so you can have a designer rod to your own taste. They sell for less than a
Oh my
dollar.
goodness.
A baby needs to be trained all day, every day. It should be a cheerful directing training, not a correction training. If a 10-month-old plays in the dirt in the flower pot, a simple swat to the hand accompanied with the command no, said in a cheerful but authoritative voice, should be sufficient. So she literally was just saying, if your 10-month-old baby is playing in dirt when you're outside, which I thought was pretty
You wouldn't,
normal,
but yeah.
baby, you need to literally beat their hand with a plumbing supply line. Like, what? And the problem is they believe that this is something that needs to be done over and over and over until the baby or the child finally like is submissive and gives up
Yeah.
because they know that it's just going to keep creating pain for them. So why would
Mhm.
they keep doing it?
Yeah.
So that's what she means when she says a baby needs to be trained all day every day. That's
She
what the
literally
training
means
is.
that.
Anytime they do something that you don't want them to, I hate how they use the word swatting. It's beating.
What? Yeah.
You're beating them on the hand or on the backside or whatever.
Mhm.
And I just think it's so messed up how when she describes what to use and the plumber supply line, she's like, you can get it at blah blah blah. They come in different lengths and several colors, so you can have a designer
You can
rod
be
to your own taste.
fashionable.
Like,
Yeah.
it's literally a commercial for a plumbing supply line
Literally.
to beat your kid with or your baby. Like,
Literally.
it
And
blows
these
my
things are,
mind.
like, long and thin and, like, it
Yeah.
would quite literally feel what I would imagine like a
Yeah.
whip.
Yeah, and the problem is now my husband is a plumber, so I'm qualified to say this, and I did ask him about this. He said that these plumber supply lines, he said they would the mom that recommended it, he said she would definitely be using the rigid kind, not like the kind that bends or anything. And he
Mhm.
said the more rigid and the thinner it is, the more it's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
So, yeah, not very cool.
No.
Now, the next quote I'm gonna read, and I'm almost done with these quotes,
That's cool.
is pretty much about something called blanket training,
Oh,
which
so sad.
you can watch lots of videos on this on YouTube about other fundies or IFB cult members doing this to their kid. And there's actually a woman on YouTube that gives a little tutorial on how to blanket train your infant. So
So
this is
horrible.
and a lot of people in the church would do this to their babies. Actually, most people in the church do. So yeah, I'm gonna read it. Through this process of association, as in spanking, the child will involuntarily recall the pain every time he hears the word no. There comes a time when your word alone is sufficient to gain obedience. So they're basically saying, the more that you beat them and say no at the same time, eventually your kid will be so scared of the pain that no is good enough without the
Yeah.
spanking, which is messed up. You're brainwashing your child with pain.
Yeah.
It says you can also stop him from assaulting his mother with a bottle held by the nipple. What baby is actually assaulting their parents
No.
like on purpose?
If anything, they're
Um,
doing that because you're teaching them that it's okay to hit.
exactly.
Like,
The
what?
same the same holds true for hair and beard pulling. You name it, the infant can be trained to obey. Do you want to wrestle with him through his entire youth, nagging him to compliance, threatening, placing things out of reach, fearing what he might get into next? Or would it be better to take a little time to train? If nothing else, training will result in saving you time. Once again, a commercial for how this
Literally.
benefits the parent instead of the child. Basically saying if you do it now, then this is less training or discipline you're going to have to do when they're older.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to the actual blanket training, though, they say that it's easy and challenging. When my children were able to crawl, in the case of one, roll around the room, I set up training sessions. Who says that when they're talking about their baby? Training
Right?
sessions. Try it yourself. Place an appealing object where they can reach it, maybe in a no no corner or on an apple juice table. When they spy it and make a dive for it, in a calm voice say, "No, don't touch it." They will already be familiar with the word no, so they will pause, look at you in wonder, and then turn around and grab it. Switch their hand once and simultaneously say no. Remember, you are not disciplining, you are training. One spat with a
Jeez.
little switch is enough. They will again pull back their hand and consider the relationship between the object, their desire, the command, and the little reinforcing pain. It may take several times. So basically, what you're supposed to do, a little summary, is put your baby on a blanket and you're supposed to take something that they really, really like a toy or something like that. You put it just out of reach of them on the blanket and then you wait. And then once the baby does, as a baby does, and starts to reach for the toy that they want because it's a baby and they don't know any
Yeah.
better, you're literally supposed to hit their hand with a switch, which those things hurt. I was hit with a switch as
Yeah.
discipline, like from a willow tree or
Mhm.
something that has that
Yeah.
like a whip basically.
Yep.
And you tell them no as you're doing it. Now, the pearls in their book say to do this several times, pretty much until the baby stops going for the object. And you are doing this multiple times a day with the baby every day with different objects. That poor baby.
Yeah. So
Like,
tough.
that's gotta be so exhausting for them and so confusing, you know? Because like, the parent is putting
Right.
something that they really love in front of them, so why can't they go
That's
for it?
normally okay for them to go for. So they're like,
Right.
"Well, why can't I go for it now?" You know?
Exactly. Okay, and then the last thing the last thing I'm gonna
You're
do
good.
or share from them or
Mhm.
from their book is, this is on page 47, I believe. They give more details of what to use for a spanking tool. It says, "Any spanking to effectively reinforce instruction must cause pain, but the most pain is on the surface of bare skin where the nerves are located. A surface sting will cause sufficient pain with no injury or bruising. Select your instrument according to the child's size. For the under 1-year-old, a little 10 to 12-inch long willowy branch, about
Just a
1/8 inch
little 12-inch long.
about an 1/8 inch diameter is sufficient, which, like we just talked about, the thinner it is, the worse it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes alternatives have to be sought. A 1-foot ruler or its equivalent in a paddle is a sufficient alternative.
Oh my
For the
God.
larger child, a belt or larger tree branch is effective. Now, keep in mind when he's saying or she is saying larger child, they're talking about under the age of 10.
Yeah.
So,
Because
still not
larger is
much
anything
older or
after
bigger.
1.
Now, the thing that really like gives me the ick is where they say that they need to spank the surface of the bear's skin where the nerves are
Yeah.
located because it'll give them just enough pain. It says without injury or
Causing
bruising.
bruising. Yeah.
So it's literally they're literally telling parents how to beat their kids without getting caught by the cops or CPS or getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Which the problem with this is that it leads to things possibly happening when parents take their teachings too literally and too seriously.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'm going to share about the pearls is something very sad and very sobering. It's a news article that I found. I'm not going to read all of it, but we will link it or put it up on the screen for you guys
Yeah.
to read in your own time. I'll go ahead and read like a summary of the article. The deaths of the 3 children in the article each allegedly happened at the hands of their parents. Though they lived in different parts of the country, the parents all had several things in common. They adopted children, homeschooled them, and beat them with 1/4-inch plastic tubes. Sound familiar? They also
Mhm.
followed the child-rearing teachings of a Tennessee evangelist, Michael Pearl. And let's see if I want to read any of this. It's a really messed up article, so if you guys wanna read it with your own discretion. It could be a little
Yeah.
triggering and a little intense. Um, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna read any more of it. But basically, the article is a deep dive into the 3 kids that died because their parents took the spanking and the neglect and the discipline way too far, and they all were, huge followers of the Pearls and had their book in their
Yeah.
homes, used regular I read, like, some of these parents, they literally had, like, the Pearls book to train up a child that we were reading from, like,
Yeah.
dog-eared and
Yeah.
highlighted, all that like, obviously, it was
They
like their
studied it.
manual. Right,
Yeah.
it was like their manual, their handbook to train their children. So,
And
yeah.
it makes it even sadder to me. I mean, it would be sad if it was any child, but
Mhm.
the fact that these children were adopted,
I know. And
and
the
who knows,
situation
like,
that they
what
came from.
situation they might have been in before they were adopted, and
Right.
then to go from that to that, you know?
And then one of the kids winds up dead, it's so messed
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was a little sobering, but I had to give an example of this type of book that the IFB
Yeah.
parents in the cult are referring to, and this is where they're getting their discipline methods from.
And I just wanna make a
And
little disclaimer that,
Mhm.
they denied that any
Yeah,
of these people like, that these kids were hurt and were a result of their book,
right.
and they were never punished for it, and people still follow the book to this day.
Exactly. I do think a few additions, like, they kept rewriting the book to make it more permissible, not as bad.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't take away from the message at all.
No.
And if you go
No.
on their website, the Pearls website, it's called No Greater Joy Ministries. They have questions and answers. They have articles up from way back, like early 2000s, 2001, 2004, where they
Mhm.
go into more detail about these things. So if you're interested in reading more,
And a deep
I
dive,
highly
yeah.
recommend checking it out. Also, I want to shout out Fundy Fridays, one of my favorite YouTubers. She talks about conservative fundamentalist, which is basically the IFB. And she did a deep dive into the Pearls and their book and just the Pearls in general on her
Yeah.
YouTube channel. So maybe we'll link to that
That's so
below.
funny because that's whose videos I watch to get insight before our thing, not even
Really?
knowing that you love her. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I love her.
Yeah.
I love her. Uh, Shout out to Jen. Anyways, now I want to get a little bit into some punishment examples.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think we just have one more question and we'll wrap this episode up.
Okay.
So, when it comes to discipline, some things that happened to me specifically and other people in the cult that I knew, um, one thing would be you had to be locked in a room or shut up in a room, like
Mhm.
usually your bedroom or for some kids it was a closet or something. You're
Mhm.
not allowed to eat or drink, and all you're allowed to have in there is a Bible, and you basically have to sit in there and read it. And this isn't like
Wow.
a little 20-minute, 15-minute timeout. We're talking like hours.
Yeah.
Hours. And I think for some people in the more extreme cases, it was like days.
Yeah.
And it's so messed up. Just it's their way, these parents' way of getting you to focus on what you did wrong and get your focus off of worldly things and
Yeah.
worldly lust, like eating or drinking, for example, and
Yeah.
focusing on the Bible and God's word.
Mhm.
So yeah, I was never in there, disclaimer, I was never in there for like days or something like that, but it was hours before.
Yeah.
And I went
Yeah.
without dinner or lunch often because
Yeah.
of it. You're like isolated in your
And
room
it
without
was
any
probably
human
for
contact.
something that you it was probably for something that you did that wasn't too serious, right?
Right. I'm trying to think of an example. It would basically be for like a white lie or
Talking back or
let's say
something.
talking back or I'm on my phone too much or I'm on my laptop too much or watching YouTube videos that I shouldn't. Just something
Yeah.
like that. Another common thing would be to write Bible verses. I know a lot of people are
Mm.
familiar, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, with writing lines, which is
Yeah.
basically a punishment where you're
Yeah,
given
I've
like a
done that.
phrase or a word and you have to write it
I
over
will
and
not
over
disobey
and
my
over.
mom. I will not disobey my mom. I
Yeah,
will not disobey my mom.
exactly. So we would do that sometimes, but we'd also do our own version of it, which would be writing a Bible verse that's specific to what you did wrong and writing it
Mhm.
over and over and over and over. I think
Ugh.
the longest I did it was like 6 pages.
Oh my gosh,
My
that is
hand
definitely
was
brainwashing too.
cramping. I know, that's the problem. My hand was cramping up so badly. Um, another thing would be washing your mouth out with soap
Mhm.
or hot sauce on the tongue for a certain amount of time, which, I mean,
Wow.
we would do that when we were really little, actually.
Yeah.
And, one problem with the soap is that it's full of these chemicals.
Yeah.
So and it's not meant to be consumed. So you're putting it in
No.
your kid's mouth and, like, you're literally poisoning them if you think about it that way,
Yeah. Yeah.
as, like, a punishment. So it's basically if you talk back, you disobey, you say crap or gosh or something that you shouldn't,
Not a cuss word.
not cut non-cuss words,
Yeah.
you could have that happen, or for the kids that don't like spicy foods, getting, like, hot sauce, like, right on the tip of your tongue, and you have to
Yeah.
keep it there for, like, 5 minutes, 10
Yeah.
minutes. Um, so another thing, now this happened to me personally, I don't know if it happened to anyone else. I think it may have
Mhm.
just been my family's thing. My sister and I would literally get locked outside of our house for a certain amount of time so my mom could be alone or so we could have, like, fresh air, get enough exercise. That was her excuse, at least. So
Yeah.
she was basically locking us out of the house even if it was really, really hot outside, no matter if we complained about the heat or if we were getting sunburnt or if we just wanted a snack or water or we needed a break. It didn't matter.
Yeah.
We were still locked outside. I remember literally pounding on the door at some point, like,
Whew.
"Come on, like, let us in. It's been, like, an hour,"
Yeah.
you know? And my mom would be doing who knows what, doing whatever,
Yeah.
talking on the phone or something, like, "Why do you need to lock us out to do that?" You
Yeah,
know?
lock yourself in your room if you need alone time.
Exactly. And then another thing, this isn't exactly, like, discipline, but it's just something
Yeah.
neglectful and I think a little messed up that a lot of parents would do. And my pastor would preach about this in the pulpit. So
Yeah.
parents will get huge or, like, regular portion sizes when it comes to food or meals, and they'll get, like, the better food,
Yeah.
but kids get, like, what's left. Once again, adding to the lesser humans than parents and not
And normally
individuals.
it's, like, less than a full portion size, right?
Yeah, right. Like, for example, my mom would make bacon, and she wouldn't make enough of it, which for what to save money or whatever, so she would make probably, like, half a thing of it, maybe a little bit
Yeah.
more. she would be, like, literally eating as she's cooking because she did that all the time, and
Yeah.
you don't even see how much she's had while she's cooking before it was put on the
Yeah.
plate to serve, and then she'd get, like, I don't know, 2 pieces, my stepdad would get 2 pieces, and then me and my sister would get 1.
Yeah.
Like, that's not enough, you know? Like, I know
No.
it's, like, a stupid, silly thing, but it's something that would happen often, and then my stepdad
Yeah.
and my mom would get their food first. They'd get as
Yeah.
much as they want or as much as they need, and like I said, would get the scraps, basically.
You guys had 3 kids, and for a
Yeah.
long time, there was only 2 of you.
Yeah.
A lot of these families have 9 plus,
Yeah.
like, so
And I
imagine
know
the portion sizes that they're probably getting, you
well, I
know?
know for a fact it's even worse.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I'm
there's a
sure.
I mean, there's a lot of kids that would come to church, like, literally starving. They would be so hungry, and they would, like, beg their parents for a snack or, like yeah, it's really
Mhm.
sad. Or, like, if they ate out. Like, I remember
Yeah.
I was forced to eat off the kids menu literally until I was, like, 15, something like that, 14
Oh,
or 15,
wow. Yeah.
anywhere, because it would save me money and, you know, you're bigger, so you don't need to eat that much anyways. So,
Yeah.
just one of those things, like, you never
Mhm.
get treated, like, equally or as, like, an individual with
Human.
your own
Yeah.
needs. Um, but yeah, another thing that was common in IFB home life, with me and other families is that if you were a kid or a teenager and you were resting or you were relaxing, that's a sin and it's wrong because idle hands are the devil's playground and slothfulness, which is the fundy's favorite word for laziness, is a sin.
Yeah.
So you
You
had
could
to
never
always
relax.
never. And if you are relaxing, are you reading the Bible? Are you praying?
Yeah.
Are you doing a devotional? Are you doing something productive?
What? I would've been on the couch with my eyes closed, like, "Alright, I'm gonna pray for a couple hours."
I
No one
would
bother me.
literally when I was supposed to do my morning devotions every morning for, like, 30 minutes to an hour, I would literally pretend I was doing them sometimes, and I would either go back to sleep, and if my mom walked in, I'd be like, "I'm praying," or or I would just do something else and shut my door, so I'd, like, read a book or, like, go on my phone or my
Yeah.
laptop or something, and then if I heard my mom coming, I'd be like, you know, "Put that away real quick." Because it was, like, the only time I had to rest into myself. You think I
Yeah.
wanted to read the Bible the whole time? No.
No.
So, yeah, that was a big thing. I remember specifically coming home from work when I was, like, 16 or 17, and I had worked, like a 12-hour shift from, like, open
Yeah.
to close at Chick-fil-A, and I came home, and I remember sitting on my bed. I hadn't even been able to take a shower yet. I was still in my gross uniform,
Yeah.
and my mom came in, she's like, "What are you doing sitting down? Get up, we have stuff to do. We have chores to get done." So, like, I you know, even after working a long shift, making my
Yeah.
own money, I still was forced to help around the house just as much as my younger sister who didn't have a job.
Yeah.
Another thing my parents did was when I hit a certain age, I was, like, honestly, almost right before I moved away,
Yeah.
they told me because I was being rebellious and, like, wanting to date at, heaven forbid, 22 years old,
Yeah.
uh, and, like, I didn't really want a curfew as much anymore. I wanted, like they were telling me my curfew was, like, 9 or 10, and I told them, I'm like, "Listen, I'm 22. Kids that are younger than me that go to the same church as me are allowed out later than me. Like, can I at
Yeah.
least come home at, like, 11, like, at the latest?" Like, something like that. There were just certain things, and, like, I didn't wanna have to help around the house as much so I could focus on my career and my job,
Yeah.
and that was a problem, apparently.
Because
So
they were against you having a career.
exactly, and that was another reason that they were so against me wanting to date, because they were very particular about who I could date and how I
Yeah.
should date. So anyways, I remember they just got sick of me, basically, and they crafted up this, like, 2 or 3-page contract. And they basically told me, "You have to sign this, and when you sign it, keep in mind you're gonna be legally bound to it. You have to sign this or we can kick you out." Knowing that I literally had nowhere to go at the time, that's one of the reasons I actually ended up leaving because
Yeah.
forget that. And in the contract were very specific rules and requirements I would be forced to follow to live there, which I get, like, the whole concept of, like, you're living under our roof, so abide by our rules.
Yeah.
But at the
With a
same time,
contract.
a legally binding contract, and also they wanted to charge me rent, which
Yeah.
they knew that I was trying to save money for a better car, to move out eventually, because I wanted to move out. I just couldn't save for it because they were charging me rent to making me pay for all these things, you know?
Yeah.
I'm paying for my own car insurance. Like, they weren't helping me with anything. Trying to create a savings fund, and they're like, "We're gonna charge you rent," you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I get charging rent sometimes in certain situations,
Yeah.
but, like, this was not the right situation because they
No.
weren't just gonna charge me rent in general because of all the resources I was using. They were gonna charge me rent, so I had to abide by certain standards and rules.
Yeah.
So, once again, more control.
Mhm.
So I had to get out of there.
Did you
Which
sign it?
no, heck no.
Oh,
I
yeah.
put it off for, like, a week, and then I was like, "Yeah, forget this."
You're
And
like,
then
"I'm out."
shortly after that, I moved out, and they wonder why I
Yeah.
moved out. That's why, mom and dad,
And
just so you know.
it makes me sad to know that they most likely went to the pastor to get help with that contract or to get the
Probably.
idea for it in the first place.
Or at least spoke to their friends, like, in the cult and, like,
Yeah,
the
like, there
parents
was
and
more
asked their
people.
advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know my mom used to, like, cry about me and complain about me and vent to, like, other moms in the church.
Yeah.
I'm sure that didn't help my reputation there.
Yeah.
But she would literally, like, be like, "I just don't know what to do with her anymore." I'm, like, literally watching Gossip Girl. Like, that's, like, the worst thing I'm doing. I
Oh
have
my
a
god.
crush on a guy and we're texting one-on-one. Oh my goodness, you know?
And it's not the person they wanted you to court with? Oh, what's going
Exactly,
on?
exactly. But another big thing in the home life is that mental illness in their mind, it doesn't exist at all. Like depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anything you could think of, it's not real. It's fake.
Wow.
And that's not just my home, like my parents, it's the whole church basically believes that.
Yeah.
And they will
That is
literally
so
talk about it.
sad.
They will literally preach about it on the pulpit.
Yeah.
And they don't believe that ADHD is the thing. They don't believe that dyslexia is the thing. They think that people are making up these excuses to be lazy, or they think that these conditions are excuses basically to get out of certain things or to get away
Or
with certain
it's like the
behavior.
devil infiltrating people's minds.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. So, if there is a mental illness and they can tell that it's really serious, or let's say someone like me is super rebellious, then either it's spiritual warfare of some kind, like you're being possessed by a demon or
Yeah.
influenced by the devil, or you weren't actually a true Christian in the first place.
It's
Which
your religious karma.
exactly. Which, like, who are you to say, like, what my walk is with God? You know, it's
Right.
such a personal, private thing, but these
Yeah.
people and parents assume that about their kids if they are rebellious, which it's so crazy how, like, rebellious in normal culture, like a rebellious kid or a wayward kid,
Mhm.
compared to, like, the IFB cult is
Oh,
so
yeah.
vastly different, so different. Like, I remember I grew up, like, literally until, like, what, a year ago, I believed I was a bad person
Yeah.
because you're told that enough times by people in your cult and, you know, your parents and your family members that you start to believe it yourself.
Yeah.
And so for the longest time, I believed I was just bad, I was rebellious, I was a black sheep, I'm never gonna get anywhere in life, all those things. That's not
Yeah.
true. I was just brainwashed and what
Yeah.
didn't fit in there because I knew something else was going on.
And
Um,
deconstructing your brain is a long
yeah,
process.
exactly. Now when it comes to, like, therapy, they don't believe in therapy because they believe that secular therapist will guide you in the wrong way, and they'll basically just help you make excuses for your bad behavior. And that, they'll make you kind of there's a term that a lot of them have used, like, dwell on your past, and
Yeah.
it builds a victim mentality, that's what they say.
Mm.
They say that if you go to therapy, they're gonna help you build a victim mentality, and then you're never going to believe that what you do is wrong, and you're never gonna learn and, like, be godly.
Plus, they'll point out that you're not living a normal life.
Exactly. Yeah, they probably were scared because they wouldn't have control over it. So when
Yeah.
it came to actual they believed in something called counseling, but counseling means Christian biblical counseling based off of the Bible, that's it, and
Yeah.
as, like, their handbook, instead of going to school
Mhm.
for it or studying psychology,
Mhm.
and the way this is done is usually with your pastor or your pastor's wife, and they were the
Yeah.
only authorities in that, which leads me to my little story I was gonna tell earlier about getting the pastor involved in your home life.
Yeah.
So, basically, when I was 12 or 13, I was going through a lot at the time, as you remember. My parents, were divorced, my mom had remarried, I was dealing with a lot of abuse at home and just confusion as a middle schooler in general, just, like,
Yeah.
not really knowing where I fit in or who I am or whatever,
Yeah.
and instead of calling a therapist when I got my meltdown and getting me help, my mom called our pastor. Even though
Mm.
screamed and begged her not to. Because you gotta think, I was 12 or 13, we were fairly new to the church.
Yeah.
There were only 30 or so people at the time, not that many. So if the pastor came and he found out, everyone else would find out too. And
Yeah.
honestly, a part of me believes that because of that whole appointment and him showing up at our house and everything is part of the reason that the parents wrote me off from the beginning. I think
Yeah, all
that
the,
word
like,
got
elite
around
family.
I think
Yeah.
word got around and then it just spread from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was super embarrassing. Everyone knew about it. He never resolved any of my problems. He kinda just, like, sat me down and, like, threw a bunch of Bible verses at me and scare tactics about, like, disobedient children and how they end
Yeah.
up and how God could punish them to bring them the light, you know?
Yeah.
And that scared me. So,
Yeah.
I behaved for a little bit. Um, so another thing that happens is there's absolutely no privacy in your
Yeah.
home when you're with the IFB.
Yeah.
Your electronics are gone through even as an adult. I remember if my mom would come in the room and I would be on my phone or my laptop, she would literally, like, grab it from me or tell me, "Give
Yeah.
me your phone. Give me your phone." And then she would use that to just look through it, all my apps, my messages, my emails, the websites I was on,
Yeah.
everything, my photos, even my photos.
Yeah.
And it got to the point to where she would do it so often, and I hated it because even if I wasn't hiding anything, which sometimes I was, let's be real, but even if I wasn't hiding anything, it still felt like a major invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
And to this day, even if my husband, like, needs to use my phone for something, which he doesn't go, "Give me your phone," or snatch it from me, but if he wants to use it to, like, take a picture or, like, or text someone for me or something, I get really, like I start to sweat, my heart starts to pound, like,
Yeah.
basically PTSD.
Yeah.
Like, some kind of
I'm not
traumatic
surprised.
reaction. And so it got to the point to where I learned, okay, as long as I'm not on my phone when my mom is around or she can't physically see the phone, then I'm good. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So I got into the habit of when I'd hear her footsteps like coming into my room, I'd like hide it under my pillow
Yeah.
or something, or I'd sit on it, or I'd hide it under my mattress or something
Yeah.
crazy. And I remember, like, when I would be cleaning the kitchen at night because it was me and my sister's job to clean the kitchen, not my mom's,
Yeah.
every night, every day, I would be cleaning it. It was like an hour-long ordeal, and I'd wanna listen to music. So it got to the point to where I eventually bought AirPods just for this purpose. I'd keep one in my ear, cover it with my hair, or, like, on this side, like how my hair is, and then
Yeah.
I'd keep one out so I could hear anyone, and then I would take my phone and literally, like, hide it in my pants, like, in my underwear and, like, my pants because I
Yeah.
didn't wanna put it in my pocket because it's too obvious. So that
Yeah.
way I could, like, go around the kitchen and listen to my music or a podcast while I was cleaning, but my mom would never ask to check my phone because she couldn't
Yeah.
see the phone. That's just really sad.
Out of sight, out of mind mentality, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember being like I would say probably we were, like, 15, like, I was 15, you
Yeah.
were 16, around that age,
Mhm.
and our thing for the people watching, we
Mhm.
were never super close to the point where we saw each other all the time. We would
Mhm.
see each other, like, 2 times a year for
Yeah.
holidays, I would say. 2 or 3,
Yeah.
maybe 3 if we're lucky.
Yeah, something like that.
But our thing was always, like, we would go off and do our own little thing for a while and talk,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
now knowing you were in a cult and knowing how extreme it was, oh, I know you were just, like, and all the stuff I would tell you.
Not
But
really though. I was living vicariously through you.
you were just like, "So, what tea do you have this year for me?"
Exactly. I was like, "Ooh, this is so exciting."
But I remember, I mean, I was a texter. I wanted to text. I
Yeah.
loved being on my phone, and I
Yeah.
wanted to be connected with you more throughout the year, and I
Yeah.
specifically remember you telling me, "Well, we can't text because my mom will read all of my texts, and she doesn't approve of me texting you."
Yep. Yep.
And
She
I was
thought
just
that you
shocked
were
by that. I was
she thought
so
that you were a
shocked.
bad influence. Pretty
Well, I
much
was in their standards, you know?
well,
I'm not
but here's
surprised.
the problem though, it's not you, you're not the problem here, there's a bigger problem, and the problem is that any IFB member, cult member, if they have a family member that doesn't believe the same way they do or go to the same kind of church that they do, then they're
Yeah.
instantly a bad influence,
Yeah.
and they need to separate themselves from them as much as possible, which is
Mhm.
sad. Because that's pretty
Yeah.
much saying like, okay, you can never have a relationship with anyone, any kind of relationship, if you have any difference in opinion or
Yeah.
belief. How harmful is that? And
And without going
closed-minded.
into detail with it,
Mhm.
that goes for immediate family as well.
Absolutely. Hello, mom and dad. And then one thing that they would do when it comes to privacy, they had no problem, and it wasn't just me, taking your bedroom door off the hinges. And it's like, okay, I'm a
That's like the
teenage girl.
maximum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maximum. I'm a teenage girl with the stepdad, and you're going to
Yeah.
take away my one privacy barrier, which is my door, my bedroom door,
Yeah.
and make me feel uncomfortable and exposed 24/7, and anytime I'd have to change or something, I'd have to go in, like, the bathroom that I also
Yeah.
shared with my younger sister. So
Yeah.
it's just like, why? That made me so uncomfortable and so angry, and they would always say, like, "Well, it's not your room, it's our room." Because the house is their house, and, like, like, you don't as a child or a teenager or even as an adult, unless you're paying rent, you have no right to
Yeah.
your own room or your own privacy. Like, you don't own it, they own it because 'cause they're making the payments. So it's like, once again, that authoritarian control over you as
And I know
someone
you
who's
said you
younger.
weren't allowed to wear, like, shorts around the house and stuff to be
Yeah,
comfortable. So when they
no.
took your door, did they expect you to just, like, sleep in pants?
Yeah. Yeah, basically. I wasn't allowed to wear, like, yoga pants around the
Yeah.
house. I couldn't wear shorts that were above my knee, just a lot of things. There were a lot
Yeah.
of weird standards.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, because of everything though, between the no privacy, the discipline, the control, the reading my text messages and everything, it, like, led me to a really, really dark place in my life, like, really
Yeah.
dark. And I remember I was a teenager, especially right before Bible college. I was constantly trying to run away,
Yeah.
and I was continually, like, suicidal. Like,
Yeah.
thoughts all the time, all the freaking time, just thinking like, "Okay, well, what would happen if I just, like, wasn't here anymore, and I didn't have to deal with all this?"
Which is sad because I know you were probably also guilting yourself at the same time of, like,
Yeah.
"I shouldn't think that way, it's sinful," and, like
Mhm. Well, I thought there was something seriously wrong with me because I
Mhm.
was thinking that way, but I was a Christian, and I was in a loving home.
There was, you were in a cult.
Well, not only that, but, like, I didn't have the best home life, as you know, not
Yeah.
the best family dynamic,
Yeah.
and it wasn't very nurturing. Like, I would say, like, our house was all control and discipline and not much love.
Yeah.
Like, thinking back, it's all, like, I only think of the bad stuff and the discipline and the
Yeah.
rules. I don't think of any, like, anything cute,
Like,
cuddly, and
fun,
sweet.
cute family moments, yeah.
No, no, I don't think of any of that. So yeah, it's sad. And, I felt so stifled and controlled, and like I can never be myself or like figure out who
Yeah.
I am, and so it was hard. It was really hard to live like that. I was depressed like all the time, and like you said, like guilting
Yeah.
myself for it, and I wasn't able to get help. So it's like it just
Yeah.
got worse and worse and worse. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, moving on to our last question of the episode.
Mhm.
Are there any scandals that happened at your church or cult or churches that you would
Mhm.
wanna talk about or that you were associated with?
Yeah, so like I've said before, our church had, like, a network with other IFB churches.
Yeah.
Those are, like, the same churches that we would go to teen camp with or youth camp,
Mhm.
or we would have youth conferences or marriage conferences or single people conferences. I went to one of those. And these churches, you get to know, the leaders in them and the kids in them and everything, and you become really close with them. Well,
Yeah.
there was a man, I'm not gonna name any names, although it's public knowledge now, but whatever. He was pretty much in charge of the music and a bunch of stuff like this athletics at teen camp for years.
Mhm.
And he was the youth pastor of a church that we were heavily associated with, like
Yeah.
very heavily. And it was also the church was only like 45 minutes away from our church. So
Yeah.
it's in close proximity too.
Mhm.
So one thing that really shattered my worldview, I think this is the thing actually that started like knocking the dominoes down for me,
Mhm.
when it came to my deconstruction was this youth pastor from that church. He ended up getting arrested because he went to Target and he was basically taking his phone and recording women in the changing rooms under the door and got caught doing
Wow.
it like multiple times. And he was married to a beautiful, sweet wife. And they had, I think at the time, like 2 kids together that were
Yeah.
great. I think his wife was pregnant again around the time of his arrest. And I just remember being just I cried and I cried and I
Yeah.
cried because you have this image of someone who's a leader in
Mhm.
your camp and in this other church that you're so close to. And I remember him and we even had our own, like, handshake, like, little,
Yeah.
like, handshake that we would do at camp, and, I looked up to him. A lot of teens looked up to him because he was, like, the young, charming, good-looking, fun, like, guy
Yeah.
at teen camp and stuff, so everyone
Yeah.
loved him. He was so popular, and then when that happened, I didn't know him as well at that point because I'd grown out of teen camp,
Yeah.
but I just remember being so shocked and so sad, and it showed me that even the coolest, kindest people in the cult that you might look up to are
Yeah.
probably living a double life.
Those normally are the ones because 'cause they're good at, grooming
Hiding.
people and manipulating people
Yeah.
and masking it.
Yeah, and it's hard because even at this point, I don't wanna put a lot of blame on him even though I know he deserves it because he's an adult, he chose to violate
Yeah.
those women like that, he chose to do that. But at the same time, like we've talked about over and over, the IFB cult is just they're not setting these men or women up for success.
They're teaching
They're
them that that's okay.
right. They're teaching them restriction. They're not teaching them properly about sex or sex ed. And they give these men, these crazy like expectations when it comes to that. And I think because of that, it's easy for the men to be hypersexual than, like, the
Mhm.
average man because, like, you restrict, 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 and then suddenly it's
Yeah.
okay to have sex because you're married, and then let's say your wife doesn't really want it that much or anything, like,
Yeah.
and porn isn't allowed, like, the man can definitely become more hypersexual, which can lead to these
Yeah.
kind of behaviors. And also just the fact that cover-up happens so often, which is why I don't really have any more scandals to talk about because it's just
Yeah.
like when you have to know that when something happens, like a scandal or something within the church with church members or church leaders, the IFB believe that it needs to be dealt with within the church,
Yeah,
not
and you're
outside of the church. You
you're
don't bring
looked
the
at
authorities in.
bad, yeah.
Mhm. If you wanna bring outside people in, like authorities or something, like, you're in the
Mhm.
wrong. No, first you need to address this in the church.
Yeah.
With the pastor, with the church member that you affected, whatever. So that's another reason I think the cover-ups happen a lot.
Yeah, because then the
But yeah,
pastor's just like, "We'll just move you down to this church over here, and it'll be fine, no biggie."
exactly, exactly. But yeah, I just remember specifically that happening, and I read the news article and I saw his mugshot, and I was just like
Yeah.
everything started crumbling. I was like, "Oh, wow." Like, if the person that I trusted and built up in my mind. I thought he was the godliest, most
Yeah.
Christian man ever. I wanted a husband like him, like The way he
Yeah.
treated his kids, his wife, he treated the kids in his youth group and us,
Yeah.
at the camp. He was really just someone I looked up to.
Mhm.
And it just yeah, it shocked me. It shocked me to my core because then I realized, like, okay, if he's not safe, then who is? Like,
Yeah.
really, you know?
And it makes me wonder because knowing their beliefs and knowing that they believe nothing,
Mhm.
gives an okay to divorce,
Yeah.
it makes me wonder if they're still married,
I don't know. I tried to
you
find
know?
out. I tried
Yeah.
to find out and
They
I couldn't
probably
find it.
are unless I'm sure he's not still in jail, I'm sure he got out pretty easy, I
No,
mean,
yeah, he got out. He got
yeah.
out. But yeah,
Well,
crazy stuff.
now I'm going to be reading 2 submissions that we received from ex-members of this specific cult,
Mhm.
and church that Savannah was a part of. So this is
Yes.
gonna give a little bit of an insight and a point of view from 2 different members, um,
Former
which is
members.
nice. Former members, yes, let me be clear on that. Yeah, they wouldn't just be like, "Here, let me just spill my tea to you even though I'm still a part of the school."
Right. Which
And
I
one
just
of
wanna say real quick, like, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I just wanna say,
you're good.
like, to them, you guys know who
Yes,
you are.
yes,
Thank you for doing this and for submitting this. I know it probably wasn't easy, and
yeah,
thank you for being vulnerable. I really hope it helps you guys on your healing
yeah.
journey, in the future. So, yeah,
Yes,
very proud
and
of you
just to
guys.
throw in there, I know that you guys are very busy, so even
Yes.
just thank you for taking the time to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one's more of a incident that happened and not as talking about the cult as a whole, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So it's called Spiced Tea Anonymous. So
Love it.
I am a third generation indie fundy Baptist cult survivor. My grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and siblings all grew up in a restrictive, authoritarian religious environment. My mother married into this family, and her father, my grandfather, became a key factor in the church's monetary standing. My grandfather was not a core member of the church, but he generously donated tens of thousands of dollars to jumpstart the baby church. He did this because he wanted to help and knew that this pastor and his family had captivated my family's attention and love. In fact, the pastor's oldest son and my sister ended up marrying. My grandfather was a very generous and kind man, and he even became a personal guarantee of the church at the cost of his own liability when they needed a loan for their new building. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away from a heart attack not long after becoming a guarantee, leaving behind my grandmother, who was disabled and needed regular medical attention, doctor's visits, and care. My aunt moved in to live with her and took care of her for the next 8 years until her passing from cancer. Until the final stage of her life, my grandmother was given zero attention from the church, zero visits, zero meals, zero help, zero cards, zero flowers, zero comfort, zero anything. The only time someone came to read the scriptures and pray with her was with hospice and my uncle and my aunt, who are missionaries, so it's kind of their job, and they're the kindest people I know. Additionally, my grandmother's house and farm is in complete disrepair, and it's very difficult to watch the pastor's children mow the neighbor's perfect yard, a complete stranger who lives right next door and doesn't even go to their church, but no one mows or helps out at my grandmother's farm. The kicker is that my pastor and his children all live on the same road as my grandmother. His oldest son lives on the same property as my grandmother. Not being shy, Pastor's family asked my grandmother for special freebies like taking my grandmother's chicken eggs and using her farm machines and supplies, oftentimes without returning the items. Is my grandmother at fault for being generous? Is she at fault for unconditional love to the end? I mentioned this to my parents and they defended the church members and pastor's family, saying it was my grandmother's fault for not speaking up about this and that I should have spoken up earlier as well. They're completely missing the point that no one even attempted to help. No one tried to come over and visit. No one did anything after my grandfather died, and the money stopped pouring in their pockets.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm.
So
And it's
sad.
true, like, I knew her grandpa and her grandma, they're some of the kindest people I've ever met,
Yeah.
and they weren't even, like, involved in the church at all, or the cult at all, thank goodness for that, but her
Yeah.
grandfather did help financially, like, literally, if it wasn't for her grandfa and I have to say this publicly, if it was
Yeah.
not for her granddad, the church would not even exist
Yeah.
thanks to his financial support. And also, the first building that we used to meet in, the small building, it was her grandpa's building that for his
Oh,
business
wow.
that he let us use at least 2 or 3 times a week for free for years.
Wow.
So, and just absolutely no acknowledgement of, the kindness that they bestowed on them. Nothing. And I remember when her grandma was dying and I heard about it and I heard that no one had helped with anything or stopped by or done anything.
Yeah.
It shocked me. And if anything, I think it gave us more validation that we did the right thing in leaving. So,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, for sure. Because if they're gonna treat someone that literally gave this church the legs to stand on,
yeah, right.
what do you
Exactly.
think they would do to just one of their members that don't financially help out or, give just your
Exactly.
10%? So now we're gonna move on to the second submission, and it is called Fan Fiction or Horror. Love that title, by the way.
Yes.
Okay. In the desolate terrain of the American West Coast lies a cult congregation that mirrors unsettling characteristics similarly found in fictional stories. Geographically isolated, this cult strategically cultivates students at their seminary, creating a dependency on authoritarian leadership, restricting
I'm sorry, I have
exposure.
to interrupt real quick. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to give a little background to what he's talking about real quick.
Okay,
Um, so he's not talking about the cult church that I've been referring to this whole time. He's referring to his experience, his personal experience, in one of the Bible colleges that the cult kind of pressures everyone
got
to go
you.
to. Yeah. So that he's
Thank you
describing
for explaining
the
that.
cult, one of the Bible colleges that they send everyone in the church to, or
Got
recommend.
you. So, restricting exposure to dissenting viewpoints and using effective manipulative control observed in disturbing concepts. The older students told me, a newbie international student, just wait till next year. Everyone who doesn't follow the rules now will have a change of heart after being here a few months. It is brainwashing, not a change of heart.
Hmm.
Taylor Swift is a sin. Open toe sandals are a sin. Reading a non KJV Bible is a sin. Standing closer than 6 inches to an opposite gender is a sin. Questioning the established norms is deemed a grave sin, echoing the oppressive tactics found in dehumanized vocabularies in the darkest moments of history. This seminary does not allow students outside of the college campus, enforcing a rigid conformity reminiscent of prison camps, where any deviation from prescribed behavior is met with condemnation. Calling parents is restricted. Using technology is restricted and privileged. Students tell on other students. No one is safe. Everyone talks behind others' backs. Dissent is not tolerated. Blind obedience is mandated, echoing the power dynamics inherent in cult structures. The pastor drives a pure white Lincoln Navigator. People open doors for him. No one dare speaks his first name. The leadership's manipulation of information is coercive, akin to the gaslighting techniques that warp perceptions that sustain unbridled power. This cult congregation boasts thousands of visits on Sundays. The cult strategically manipulates its members, political beliefs, and endorsements during elections. It sends countless teenagers and young adults as free laborers to knock on neighbors' doors in whatever weather condition to advertise for their congregation. This seminary raises millions of dollars in a 1 week mission conference. Looking beyond its religious facade, this institution operates as a self contained dominion. It has its own publishing company, its own stores, its own library and gym, as well as a kindergarten, middle school, high school, college, seminary, and much, much more. It operates as a one stop kingdom from hell. And no one dares to say anything against this place. What they've been doing to children deserves to be in the hell below hell. I'll let you decide whether you think my experience is fictitious or horrifyingly real.
Oh, good stuff, man. Good stuff.
And can I just say, extremely well written, both of those. Thank you.
Very, very well done. Thank you guys. I think it's amazing the way he's explaining the dynamic and the culture of
Yeah.
a Baptist Bible college because it really echoes my experience in a way, except I will say the one
Yes.
that he went to is much larger,
Yeah.
than the one I went to. I went to, like, a smaller
Mhm.
version of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's the perfect introduction into part 3.
Yes. Which we're gonna get into next week.
Yes.
So, if you liked this episode and you wanna hear more about the college experience within this cult, definitely tune in. We have that, and we have one more part for you too. I'm not gonna expose what it's about yet. We're gonna keep it a surprise.
Yeah,
But,
you guys, definitely wanna watch the college episode, the cult college episode. It's gonna be
yeah.
very juicy. We're gonna go through their actual code of conduct that they have on their
Yeah.
website that I had to follow, and I have a few interesting stories to tell too.
Yeah.
It'll be
Yeah.
fun.
So once again, I want to make the little announcement that um, we're trying to create a community here. If you feel like you want your voice to be heard, reach out to us. We're here to talk with you, even if you don't want it to be on the podcast. But if you want to create a submission, just like these two very kind people did for us, then we also will have in our link tree a link to submit. You can do it anonymously, no problem. Or we may even be open to having some guests on. So, contact us and we'll talk. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for part 3 next week. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.